Hello there. I'm in London again today, in St James's Park, which is the park right beside Buckingham Palace, and on its other side, this, which is Horse Guards Parade. It's the kind of place where sort of political and royal events happen, changing of the guards, that kind of thing. The kind of place that tourists might go and visit, and I'm just viewing it from within the corner of the park itself. It's an interesting view. It's a view I've painted before, and I'm actually here as part of the London Plein Painters Group. We meet up every month and paint some part of the park. That's my spot there. There's my bags. And I'm going to be painting in an interesting and different way today, just to kind of experiment, just to show you how different things can work in different ways. I'm going to start with a particular kind of brush type, which is a wide flat. Previously, I've used the Da Vinci Spin, which is a beautiful brush. I've had it for many years, and I recommend it. But it isn't the cheapest brush in the world. It's, I don't know, 30 euro, pound, dollars, that kind of number. And so I thought I'd go on Amazon and buy a set of these super cheap. There's like 4 in a set. They come for around 8 coin, and they include a 30mm, the same as my Da Vinci Spin, but they also have a 20mm and a 40mm. You get the idea. And they're basically almost as good. They're certainly very, very usable, and I'll be using them throughout this. I won't use the Da Vinci Spin, although there does come a point where I have to use a thinner brush just because you get into the detail. Also, as you can see, I'm painting this in a very particular way. I'm starting with red paper, intensely deep red paper. That's obviously intentional. I brought only this sheet with me today because that was the game. It was what happens when you paint onto red. And red will infuse everything. It's kind of like the background energy for the entire painting by the end. I'm also changing things up because I'm an urban sketcher by heart, by my spirit. I only do paintings occasionally. And so I tend to go about my paintings as I would tend to go around my urban sketching. Therefore, I'm kind of drawing with the paint, especially in these early stages. And you'll see that I'm actually drawing with ink. This is actually a Noodlers Ink. I bought a whole load of Noodlers Inks. They're, responsibly priced, meaning not expensive. And I bought them originally for fountain pen use, but I didn't really like them in fountain pen use. They're not particularly waterproof, and they weren't the performers I wanted them to be. But using them as a kind of wash, as a kind of paint, is kind of interesting, because you can see as the ink goes on, it goes down really dark and really solid, and then it kind of fades off in quite a nice way. So it's useful because you lay down a very sort of confident mark. But the time you've come back round to it, that confidence is just quietened down a bit, and you can do other things on top of it. So it's a kind of changing colour as it sort of soaks and fades, and it happens within 30 seconds, but it just does something that feels quite, well, I wanted to say sophisticated. It doesn't really make sense, but there's something about this because obviously the ink is now dry, so I can put acrylic paint on top of it, for example, and eventually I'll put oil paint on top of that, and the ink is there as kind of like almost like a background guide. Now, you might have noticed that although I'm sitting here live looking at this view, I just started with the brush immediately. I didn't do any kind of setup. There's no grid, obviously. There's no pencil guidelines. That's because this is a joy painting. What would I call a joy painting? Meaning I'm doing it for fun. I'm doing it for pleasure. I'm doing it as kind of a personal challenge, but not in a nasty way. I'm not going to be upset with myself if I get bits wrong, and I get bits wrong in everything I do. I'm doing it in a way that's exploratory to see, how I am today and how my style changes, how my ability changes, how my mood changes, and how everything becomes a sort of holistic, all part of one thing. So rather than this be a stylistic exercise, which is sort of disconnected from who I am, it's the reverse. It's a kind of completely dependent on me, the view, the day, how I'm feeling, what I brought with me. It's a very kind of wellness thing. What's that word I'm looking for? Mindfulness. Mindfulness, that sense of here, now, super aware of yourself, aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And in that way, it's both very satisfying and also strangely exhausting. You do end a session like this feeling quite tired. This actually was a 4.5 hour painting session. and I've recorded the entirety of it on my little GoPro. And I'm going to speed up the footage, obviously, so you don't have to sit through 4 hours. So you get that kind of the shape of the rhythm, the kind of the process. Yes, I mean, people are interested by process. I'm interested by process. But it's just much about rhythm, because I'm not really cutting anything out. It's just a long recording. So you can sort of see the rhythm of what I paint first, second, third, and fourth, etc. And the sort of the continuousness, I guess not a good word, is it? But that sense that you're kind of going for it. You're not sitting there and wondering. You're not kind of working things out particularly in your head. You're working them out on the paper. And remember, this is paper, not canvas. It's not precious. It's not like, I don't consider this to be art in that sense, where it feels like it's somehow, a precious thing. In fact, this day I had a lovely American couple came up to me and were super sweet about the painting, and they basically inquired about purchasing it, and I felt a little bit embarrassed because from my point of view it's not really purchasable, because it's not really that kind of painting, if that makes sense. It's obviously in my head, not in their head, because whatever they think is good is that's them, that's brilliant. But for me, these are like a sketch, and therefore they have immediacy, which is somehow has a different, I want to say the word value, has a different value to me, meaning, again, I'm going to sound a bit demeaning, aren't I, but a lesser value. If somebody said to me, can you do me a painting that I could put on my wall that, I can show my friends? It would be like, oh, wow, okay, that's a different kind of thing. And that's a thing where I'm going to think about it and sort of basically design it, I would say. I think there's a big difference between intention, which I think of as designing. I think a lot of contemporary art is designed, and it's not just designed, it is design itself. A lot of the contemporary artists, I think, almost to be fair, almost every contemporary artist that you'll get in a gallery is designed. Now, if I was going to be mean, I'd say contrived. I don't mean to be mean though, because I don't blame them. I mean, I was looking at, there's an artist called Jenny Saville, excellent artist, paints the female form, and he's been painting for, 30, 40 years. And I remember her back then, I'm that old, and very kind of almost political in her view of the human body, of the female body, very kind of unblinking, very honest, very true. And increasingly, as you look through her career, when you look at her work in a gallery, there's a big show currently on in London of her work, it becomes more, or certainly towards the end, becomes more designed. I'm trying not to be mean here, but it becomes more intentional. It becomes more sellable, I suppose. It becomes more what the majority of people probably want. It's more kind of colourful. The people have, the models she uses are all beautiful people, and there's something that, from my point of view, is lost in that. And that's about the immediacy. That's about seeing someone and saying, oh my God, look at your face, can I paint you? It's no longer that. It's very much something else, something much more, trying not to say contrived, because that does sound negative. But what I mean by contrived is it very intentional, very planned, knowing what the goal is. Now, when I'm painting this, I don't really know what the goal is. I mean, you're seeing the picture, the top left, that shows you what the end product is. I don't know that's the conclusion when I start this. All I know is red. So I know it's going to have this undercurrent of the intensity of this red colour. But I don't know the other colours I'm going to be using. I allow those to be decisions I take instinctively through the process. And for me, that's where the excitement comes. That's where the learning is. I think if you do the same thing every time, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. The ability to repeat your style every time is in itself a real skill. But if you're doing that every time, obviously you're not learning. What you're doing is demonstrating. You're showing your ability to repeat that style. It in itself is a worthy aim. But I think there's something, for me personally anyway, far more exciting about discovery, about doing a thing and, kind of saying, okay, that bit worked. And that was interesting, using the ink. I mean, the ink here I'm using with the flat brush, never done it before. I'm doing it here now on a big piece of paper. This is 800 by 500 millimeters, little under A1. sort of, a big old sheet, and I'm doing it publicly in probably one of the busiest parks in London on a Saturday at 11 o'clock it is by now. And you could imagine, there's a billion people walking past. And there's a thrill to that, because if it's working, everybody can see it's working. And if it doesn't work, everyone can see it doesn't work. And you feel that sense of stepping up. I imagine, I'm not an athlete, but if you're an athlete and you go running at a big event, or whatever athletic sport you do, if you're doing it in a big stadium, if you're doing it surrounded by a crowd, even if you're doing it surrounded by just a handful of people, some local little sports ground, and there's 20 people standing on the sidelines cheering you on, that makes a massive difference than if you're just on your own. If you get up in the morning and you're going for a jog and there's no one there to see you do it, it's just you and your earphones going for a jog. Imagine how different it must feel when you walk out of a changing room and there's 300,000 people in a stadium for the Olympics or something. Wouldn't be 300,000, would it? There's no stadium that big, but you know what I mean? A very big stadium. And you walk out and people are cheering. Imagine how that must step up your response. Your heart goes, your head goes, your shoulders go back, and you think, this is my moment. This is when I perform. And that's what plein air painting, sort of on-site painting or sketching, that's its real sort of superpower. The fact that you're stepping up because you kind of feel as if that's what the world wants you to do. And the amount of people who will walk past you and just be so totally positive. And in fact, I've been doing this for a long, long time now. It's awesomely rare to have any kind of potential negativity, and I'm quite fine-tuned to negativity. I'm the first one to take a bit of slight if somebody says something that sounds a bit off at work. But I once had somebody talk about a sketch I was doing. It was of a church, and I'd forgot the clock face that was on the spire of the church. And this chap came over and said, "You forgot the clock," and walked on. And I kind of sort of looked and thought, oh yeah. That was about as negative as it gets. Someone spotting the one mistake that's so blaring and obvious, but you hadn't seen it yourself. So actually, I kind of thought, yeah, thanks. I'll just put that clock face in then, shall I? You get the point. A lot of people, I think just about everybody on the planet, I think would be scared about doing something creative publicly, out on the street, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, you shouldn't be, because especially if you do it in a place like this, by which I mean a park. If you're doing it down your local street and people know you, maybe that's a bit tough. But if you go down to somewhere where everybody's there for the same purpose, and that's to enjoy themselves. In a park like this, no one's there to have a bad day, It's a sunny day, they're all happy, they're sitting on the grass, they're having picnics, they're taking their dogs for a walk, they're playing with their kids. Everybody's in an upbeat, positive mood. And actually when they see you, they kind of go, oh cool, that's a nice new extra benefit to this experience. If they see somebody painting in a park, they will, half of them will come over. Even if they don't talk to you at all, they'll walk within sort of, 5 steps of you, walk behind you just to go, what's he doing? Just because it's part of the experience of being in the park. There's a sense of, I've made the effort to go to the park, and in the park, I saw fun things. You see that crazy guy on the roller skates with the big music thing on his shoulder. You see the person walking 5 dogs, and one of the dogs is going in a different direction the whole time. You see all those little fun little stories, little vignettes of stories that make you think a fun day at the park. And one of those little fun vignettes, one of those tiny little stories, is you doing a painting or drawing or a sketch. People just walk past and think, oh, that's nice. Often they'll think, I wish I could do that. And I think my point is, I think everybody could. What's getting in the way is that sense of personal embarrassment, that sense of, oh my God, I can't, or I don't have the kit, or I wouldn't know where to start, or I wouldn't know how to get myself out of a problem if I got into a problem. What happens if the painting didn't work and I felt, oh, what do I do? That kind of thing. And that's the same with everything. It's the same with, I'm sure, the athlete going out for a run on the first day. It's the sense of course, no one knows. No one's born knowing. And as many books as you read, not that anyone reads books anymore, as many YouTube videos as you watch, nothing comes close to doing it yourself. As in learning. No one can watch 100 YouTube videos and learn how to do it. What they can do is be inspired enough to try. And in the trying, there is the learning, and there is the joy. And I think that's the biggest point for me. I mean, as I said, I'm here on the London Plein Air Painters Day. There's, I think, 70 other artists this day, all over the park. Within where I am now, there's like 2 behind me, and there's 1 to the right. So, you can just turn around and go, all right, there's people around you doing the same thing you're doing. And every single one of them is different. Every single one is at a different point, and every single one of them is smiling. And even those that are like, oh, my painting doesn't work, there's a sort of joy in that feeling. That sounds silly, doesn't it? But that sense of the struggle, some people like the kind of angst part of painting or drawing or sketching. They like to be a bit angry. It's in their personality that to have a bit of kind of grit, that they kind of have to battle the painting. And some people are kind of leaning back, headphones on, really enjoying the vibe, and just riding it like they're surfing a wave, They're just going with the whatever it is the paint wants to do that day. On that, I should say, because I often say a phrase like what the paint wants to do that day, and it probably sounds quite metaphysical, quite, abstract. There's actually a more serious point to that. Paint is obviously, it's a fluid, isn't it? And like acrylic paint, I'm now onto the oil paint stage at this point, and they do actually behave differently in different weather conditions. I mean, on a cold day, they'll be they won't flow, they'll be very kind of more solid, wrong word, but you know what I mean, more viscosity, stickier, less pleasant, basically. And on a super hot day, they'll be kind of basically runnier, they'll be flowing. And the paper you use, the type of, or the canvas you use, or the board you use will make a total difference to how those surfaces then feel. So it isn't just about knowing how the paint works, as it were. It's responding to how it's changing. I mean, I don't think anyone can sit down and say, let me understand how this paint's going to feel in advance, based on the weather conditions, based on how much sun hits the canvas, based on how much wind there is, or any of that. No one can work that out. That'd be madness. What you can do is say, oh, look, the paint's starting to move in a different way now. It's starting to be a bit more fluid, or I need to kind of maybe use some more solvent or whatever you use to make your paint flow in a different kind of way. Maybe you're trying a different solvent. I'm mostly, when I'm using oil paint, I'm not using any kind of thinning, maybe a tiny bit of what's called Zest-It, which is a brush cleaner, which also is used as a paint thinner. Maybe just a tiny dab now and again for certain paints. But I've just bought myself, I haven't tried it yet, but just bought myself a bottle of poppy oil because somebody advised me that was quite a fun thing to use with oil paint. So that's also part of the fun of saying, I've got paints, I've got different papers, and different paints from different manufacturers respond differently, and different colours from the same manufacturers can respond differently, and then different solvents and mediums and oils can also make it respond differently. And again, I stress, I would say it's impossible. Maybe an expert will know, but I think it's basically impossible to understand that in any way other than doing it. You can, in the past there'd be a book on art that you'd have on the shelf, and it would be, 300 pages, and there would be a page on this and that and the other, and you'd be just thinking, oh God, if I read all this, I'll know it all. And no, well, at least maybe you've got some kind of special memory that I don't have, but none of it sticks in your head. It's like trying to learn how to ride a bike from a book. Even learning how to drive a car from a book. There's certain things you can get, but there's no way you're going to do it without doing it. You've got to get paint on your hands, as I always do. So let's have a bit of a kind of sum up to where we are at this point. We've laid down the sort of the undercolors, the undertones in acrylic. Now, the reason I use acrylic is it dries very fast and it's opaque, so it covers over the red of the paper in this case, and so it does a very that kind of undercoat feeling. And often what happens is some of the marks made in the acrylic I like. Basically some of them I'll keep, that's the point. And some of them are just there to kind of be the background for where the oil's going to go. What I'm doing is layering. I'm putting colour upon colour upon colour. So I've got the colour of the paper, I've got the black of the ink, of which very little will show through in the end, but it's like a guide, although there's quite a bit in the tree still. And the railings and things like that, where the darks are basically. Then we're going in with the acrylics, as kind of painting the whole thing, but in a very kind of a quick way. I say quick, probably it was about an hour. And then you're going in with oils as the kind of refinement that goes over the top of everything else. So that brings a whole load of quality and dignity. That's the thing I feel about oil. There's something refined, by which I mean there's a quality to it. Maybe it's in my head, maybe knowing that it's oil paint gives it some kind of special status in my mind. Maybe acrylic feels like, acrylic is a Ford and oil is a Mercedes. Is that fair? That sense of they both do a very fine job, but they both come at a different price point, and they both come with an expectation of quality because of the price point. And that's something you understand when you get into it in the first place. There's no confusion. You understand from the beginning when you look at it on the shelf. That's part of that process. Now I'm into a good moment here. It's worth highlighting. I'm using red oil paint. It's a red that's close to the red of the paper. And I'm kind of using it to lift off certain elements within the painting. It's the same kind of thing I would do if I was doing a sketch and I would do a perimeter line, sort of a dark line or a thicker line weight around certain elements in order to kind of push them forward or sort of separate them from other elements within the image. And by using the same color as the background paper, it's a bit like, when you use watercolor, not that I use watercolor very much, and people go on about the importance of leaving the white, of not just painting the whole paper. And it's a bit like a way of faking that, as if the whole way through you were really smart enough to leave little bits of red here and there. And I'm not, but I can get myself some red oil paint and I can imply that redness. And it works in a really interesting way. It connects you back to the undercolor. And the undercolor is often sort of still very much present around the outside of the painting, around the border. And so by putting sort of more red into delicate moments within the main body of the painting itself, it just connects it all together. It's like tying it together. It's quite magical. I think it's the kind of thing where you could not think of it. If I was taking a sheet of red paper, I wouldn't necessarily think, and I must take a tube of red oil paint. But if you do remember it, it can do something really useful. It's a really good sort of last stage of the painting color, just to kind of unify things, just to make sure that the red undercolor is sort of respected, I guess, and you're connecting back to it. It really helps. Another color that became increasingly important in this image that I never imagined would is, of course, the orange. I came to the orange in the sky really thinking it would be kind of like just a warm color, like a kind of red, a sort of pale red that would sort of connect. But actually it jumped. The particular orange I had was very loud and jumpy, and I enjoyed it as soon as it went down. And so suddenly that also became a highlight. The orange on top of the red was more electric than I was imagining. And that kind of, when you then get that light blue, which again is sort of sparky, those sparky colors together, the whole thing is leaping off the page like a firework display in a slightly over the top way. No, let's not beat around the bush. In an extremely shouty way that's probably too much. I did look around at the end and think, I wonder what would have happened if I'd used grey and green and tan and just try to pull back on the intensity and the vibrancy of the color. And I thought, what the hell, I enjoy it, but still, maybe next time. Now, an interesting thing is happening. You're seeing again, I wouldn't have predicted. I'm not even particularly aware of doing it at the time, but right at the very end, right when I'm in the last few minutes, out comes the wider brushes again, just to kind of reinforce some of the bigger brush marks, largely around some of the foreground elements. But I just became aware that there was a sort of finickiness, lots of little tiny marks, and I just wanted some more courage in some of those marks. So out came the wider brush and a few more kind of boosts to some of the marks. I also felt that the tree wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to do. So I spent a little bit more time just trying to finagle that tree into something a little bit more respectable. It seemed too cliche, though it was sitting there, it was too obvious, and I wanted to kind of mess it up a bit, try and kind of feather it a bit. And so here we are. Painting's coming to an end now, and I'm thinking of the meetup. I take my final shot. It's always important to get the establishing shot, and I sometimes forget, and I do curse myself. That sense of, yes, I really was there, and it really was a really fun day. And then off to the throwdown, as we call it, which is all of the plein air painter group meeting up and showing what they've done and talking about techniques, talking about what worked and what didn't, and basically catching up from last time. Here's the final painting in all its vivacity. I guess what I suggest to you, if you have a mind to, why not try yourself a bit of intensely coloured paper, go somewhere where everyone's having a good time, and sharing it, Show everybody you're not afraid to just show your creative side. And everybody, I promise you, is going to be on side for you. They're all going to be saying, yay, go for it. No one's going to be critical because everyone wishes they had the same courage that you have. Thank you very much. See you next time.